Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a good weekend. How's my audio? Can you hear me? We had some audio issues on our conference last week, so if a couple people could let me know how my audio is, that would be great. Sounds good. Thanks, Tony. First question, where's everybody joining us from today? We're up here in the once again bitterly cold Fargo, North. Pipe in. We have somebody from Indiana. I know we have some Minnesota people on here today. Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So, a little bit of a last minute topic I wanted to talk about today, and that is, we're in the time of the year where balance sheets are being fine-tuned, discussed with banks, and then along with it, we're in a farm economy that isn't necessarily the most strong. Balance sheets have weakened the last few years. And so just wanted to talk about a process and share with a tool that I think all farms should just thoroughly understand and own. And at the end of the day, you should be, in my opinion, you should be going to your banker with ideas on how to fine tune your balance sheet. And so I want to arm you with the tools that will enable that. The old saying, you can give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. That's really our mission here is we want to give you tools, but at the same time, give you knowledge to help you manage your farm. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through an actual example that I saw on a farm a few years ago. And given the retrenchment in working capital, this example has become more and more of an outlier. This is a 2 or 3 years old now, a farm with quite a strong balance sheet. So, I realize this tool doesn't really fit everybody. We got more Minnesota, Nebraska, a number of people from Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kansas. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Appreciate you taking your time out of your day to be with us here today. So first of all, I'm going to talk about this balance sheet optimization that I worked through with a farm a few years ago. We sat down, we looked at the balance sheet. This farm was in a situation where they had a comfortable working capital position. So they didn't really need to do anything as far as fine tuning their balance sheet. But they came to me and said, we've been paying an awful lot of interest expense. What do you think, Nick, about kind of readjusting some of the maturities that we have and applying some of our working capital? It doesn't need to be working capital. This can also be assets. In this instance, they took working capital, applied it to debt, and then use that to restructure some things. So I'll just walk through this scenario. So this was a farm, 10,000 acres in size. We're talking about intermediate debt here. They had a $1.3 million of intermediate debt, an interest rate of 4.6%. The average term across all these notes was 4 years. And so the debt service on these notes was a hair over $350,000 a year, or approximately $45 an acre. And over the lifetime of each one of these notes, they were going to pay $125,000 in interest. I think what happened here, I didn't know this farm intimately, but I think what happened here is there was probably 1 or 2 pieces of debt that got Section 179 depreciation to minimize their tax liability. And I think one of those pieces ended up getting financed at the same time. That's kind of a cardinal sin of managing your balance sheet, but they were in a strong position. So at the end of the day, it just is what it is. So they had a comfortable level of working capital. Once again, this is maybe an outlier scenario. They had 50% of the revenue in working capital. That definitely is quite a bit above average for today's economy. But what they decided to do is they basically just lined up their 6 or 7 intermediate notes, took the 2 highest rate notes and paid them down. And they paid them down approximately $250,000. The 200, after that, they still had a sizable working capital cushion, so they didn't stretch their working capital too thin. And so when he paid off these notes, the notes were on 2 pieces of equipment. But to get as much leverage as he could with the bank, I told him to still allow the bank to collateralize those 2 pieces of equipment in his ask. And so the ask that he went to the bank with was a principal amount of a little over $1 million, taking our interest rate down to 3.75. And once again, these interest rates, are a little bit low. So maybe today the average would be 5.6, and the ask would be bringing it down to 4.75. And then just pushing the term out. We had started, we kind of fell off the high commodity prices. And one of the main goals in this exercise was to just free up some cash flow, bring our cash break evens down. And so at the end of the day, what they did there is they negotiated a final interest rate of 3.9%. So here's where things get interesting. Their new interest rate was 3.9%. Their new term on their notes was 6 years. So their annual debt service now was $197,000, or about $25,000 per acre. So annual debt service here, post restructuring, pre-restructuring, if you remember, $356,000. The really interesting thing here is the total interest to be paid was $129,000, an increase of only $3,600 over the term of this loan. $3,600. If you if you were walking down the street and you saw $3,600 sitting in a bag, you'd tell that story for the rest of your life. But for the scope of this farm, $3,600 wasn't a huge amount of money. And so what they were able to do here is not really affect the security of the bank. So the bank was in as good of a financial position, actually in a better financial position. They were proactively coming to the bank. This was a proposal that they came to the bank with. Oftentimes, banks don't get presented with proactive scenarios nearly often enough. And because of the extra security in the equipment, they were able to negotiate a lower interest rate. And so that lower interest rate is what allowed them to push the term out. Where were we at before? The average term was about 4 years, so they added 2 years onto the note, and really just didn't hamper themselves with any amount of interest increase. $3,600 is $3,600, but at the end of the day, that is just really not a lot of money for this farm. I understand that we have probably people that are just getting started. Maybe they have a field or 2. I think we have some people on here that have some of the biggest farms in the country. Probably talking 30, 40, 50,000 acres. And so you gotta bring this all back to your farm, on a relative basis. But looking at the keys to what made this work is just really knowing and owning. This farm really knew and owned its numbers. This debt payment information should be, available to you with a click of a couple buttons. And on top of that, I spend a weird amount of time in debt payment calculators on, it's kind of I call it a dream calculator for me on just evaluating whether it's different real estate scenarios or looking at how can we minimize our cash flow expenditures. Debt payment calculators, it'd be interesting if I had to do a search of what apps I use most on my phone. I would say the this little debt payment calculator app is probably right up there with something, not like quite like my email, but right up there with something like a Twitter. I really love evaluating the amount of interest and just trying to fine tune the term and the interest rate and the percentage down. And so the next point I want to get to is, pretty consistent theme in the ag economy these days is interest rates. And this would be a perfect time to potentially get out of, or to try to get out of or convert some floating interest rates, some variable interest rates, and converting them to some fixed rates. As you know, $1 million of debt, an extra 1%, that's $10,000. And when you run that over 4 or 5 years, we start talking about just a big, like a headwind, a cash flow headwind facing your farm. So reducing our interest rate, if we can, the bank is going to need to be in a much more comfortable situation for that to actually occur in today's environment. So trying to give them more security, that's going to take assets. That's going to take, whether it's working capital, potentially putting some debt onto some paid off assets, some land, or looking at, is there extra equipment in the farm? For this farm, let's just say they didn't have this working capital position. Let's say they had next to no working capital. Well, if they could free up a couple $100,000 of cash via, letting go of some equipment and really, pushing the utilization of the machinery, freeing up $160,000 a year in interest is just huge. Got a couple questions here. So looking at, what can you do to fix a negative working capital? Unfortunately, a lot of people preach about working capital to the point where you're probably sick of hearing about it. But so I get a couple people commenting like, we understand the importance of working capital, Nick, but what do I do to improve our working capital situation? And there really is no silver bullet. It's just doing a lot of little things better. Maybe it's shopping some of your inputs around, trying to find a different source of fertilizer, identifying times of the year at which your grain buyers are maybe hungry for grain. So, lining up your grain sales with those times that the market's hungry and trying to get an extra 5 or 10 cents out of your basis, trying to squeak out the most cash flow you can out of your banking situation. It's just doing a lot of little things better. The real only big way to fix a big a negative working capital number is you're going to have to, the only real way to do it is to just free up some assets. So selling some equipment, mortgaging on some land, selling some land. And I know that's not what a person wants to hear, but at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. So I'm a big fan of just always trying to do things a little bit better. So when you do have that good year, which, cost of production is whittled down, it's, not as low as what some people are saying due to where fertilizer prices are at today, but we are going to have another good year. And just remember that, put that money on your working capital and build a financial moat. So what app are you, Austin asked, what app are you using for the debt calculator? I'm going to get into that here right now. So I will get us off this screen. Actually, if you want to read this case study for yourself, I'll just paste it here in the comment box. This is a little bit dated and obviously a scenario that not a lot of people are sitting around with 50-60% working capital, although I can name dozens of them that I know firsthand. So it's not like this is the only farm in the country that isn't a solid financial situation. So we're going to jump over now to our spreadsheet that we have built. Hang on one second. So hopefully you can see that. I'm going to try to zoom in here. So here's a loan calculator. I borrowed some of the formulas from something that we'd found online. But really what we're trying to do here is just take a look at how much interest we're paying. That's really all that a calculator like this, obviously you want to know your payment, but I just kind of focus my eyes directly on some of our interest expense that's embedded in here. Right here, column H. I'll post a link to this here at the end of the presentation. So if we put in a loan amount of $250,000, you know, an interest rate of let's just say 5%. We have a loan period of 4 years. Here we're looking, and this is a monthly calculator, which, yeah, obviously isn't ideal. I came up with this little webinar idea over the weekend, so I didn't have enough time to convert this to an annual. But at the end of the day, you can see here our total interest in this scenario is $26,000. So if we just copy that, edit, paste special, we're just going to paste the value. Interesting, simple little formula. Convert it back to a dollar. So then let's say we're able to sell some little piece of equipment on this farm. I'm actually going to just do our monthly payment as well. And then the total of these monthly payments. Okay, so now we can just start tweaking these numbers. So let's say we're able to, you know, free up $20,000 or $30,000 of cash somewhere, $220,000, and we push our term out to 6 years, and maybe we just, you know, start shopping some of our loans around and see if, you know, due to the higher security position in this loan, and that might not be true with the depreciation we've seen in equipment, but let's just say we're able to get us down to a 4.85%. So as we can see, if we compare our annual loan payment, sorry, I'm just doing the stuff at the fly because I think it's valuable to understand the thought process. So here we've lowered our annual debt service by approximately $26,700, if I'm doing my math right. Yeah, $26,700. So let's say this is a 1,000-acre farm. You know, we'd be looking at lowering our debt service by $26 an acre, and all we're doing is, you know, prepaying our debt, prepaying the note, you know, basically restructuring it and pushing our loan period out. And then as we can see, the cost of freeing up $26,000 of cash per year is $8,000. So really, what I'm trying to sell you on is getting you in the position where you can do this proactively. And if you can do it proactively, you're going to be in a situation where you can have a frank, honest discussion with the bank. You know, this probably isn't the environment where banks are going to be super excited about lowering your interest rate. But at the end of the day, if you come to them with a plan and you come to them with your numbers laid out, I think you can really, you open the window up to having an objective discussion on minimizing your cash flow. Sean asked, what percentage of farmers I work with lost money. I just stepped away from the consulting work that I'd been doing to focus, all my effort on harvest profit. I'd been getting pulled a little thin, and this answer probably, I hate to even answer like this because people are going to, I don't know. I don't want to open the door to turn this into a negotiation or a debate, but in my part of the world, yields have been good enough the last 2 years that 90% of farmers have shown black ink if you average the last 2 years together. I don't think that is, a big outlier. Obviously, there's been a lot of red ink, but in what I've seen on the farm is, especially if you did some proactive grain marketing, yields were good enough to keep us in the black. That doesn't change the fact that it's really nervous going forward. Any sort of average yields, at 350 corn futures, or the type of wheat prices we're seeing, sub $9 cash soybeans, we're above that now. Yeah, I frankly don't think things are as doom and gloom as what the news articles say. Most farmers I know made money, so just wanted to. I could get into that a lot, but anyway, I tend to think the news articles you read tend to be about 6 months old. There's been a lot of talk of lower cost of production. Yeah, lower cost of production. If you bought your fertilizer last summer, fertilizer isn't nearly as low right now as it was. So anyway, that's an aside. So what I'm trying to get at here is, I think you need to just own these loan values and just constantly be tweaking the different levers. So what levers do you have? Obviously, we can't just magically make our debt service go down. So, factors that you can control, you have your factors that you want to analyze anyway. You have your asset value. That's made up of your working capital, equipment, land. So that's a lever you can pull. Actually, we're going to call this levers. The term, obviously the bank isn't going to want to push the term out beyond the life of the asset, but term does a great job of freeing up annual debt service. Interest, obviously interest rates are starting to kind of just float higher. What it sounds like that's going to continue here in the short term. So, maybe what we're doing here, instead of the examples where I showed you of decreasing the interest rates, there's probably a lot of value in just pushing your term out a couple of years and fixing the interest rate. So you're picking up an opportunity, it's an opportunity gain. So you have your asset values, you have your interest, you have your term, and then you just have, kind of your amount outstanding, which correlates directly with your asset values. So you have these 4 different levers. And I was going to build this tool yesterday, but my wife told me to get off the computer. And once again, you give a man a fish, he's going to eat good, but you teach a man to fish and he'll eat good for the rest of his life. And so the tool that I'm actually going to build this tool for our software customers and people that have signed up for our Business of Farming course. But what I want to be able to do, and I don't think it's rocket science on how to build this, but if you can just line up each one of your notes here, amount, interest, term, one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many notes you have. And you can link off this first sheet up here with a loan calculator. So this could be note 1. Once we have that, we can copy that, create a copy. So we can do note 2, and then you can just link each one of these. So you can do, you know, annual payment, annual interest, total interest, and just start evaluating scenarios. And so I could sit here and build this for you, but I think it's valuable for you to own this and to come to the bank with the knowledge of, here's an idea I have for you, Mr. or Mrs. Banker, on a way to set up the farm, reduce our cash outflow, lower our cost of production. That puts the bank in a better situation. That puts the farmer in a better situation. And so the point of me hopping on this webinar with you today is just to show you that these little loan amortization tools are really powerful, a really powerful way to minimize your cash expenditures and just evaluate different scenarios. At the end of the day, this isn't magic, this isn't art, these are numbers. And so I just wanted to provide you with this tool that you can use on your own. I'm gonna, like I said, for our customers, I'm gonna blow this up and spend a lot of time with it here the next couple weeks, so you can use a little more advanced version. But I'm going over here and copying this link. If you go to that Dropbox link right there, you might need to actually upload or download this tool in the upper right corner. Dropbox, for whatever reason, doesn't just allow you to download it directly, but you can download that tool and use on your own. And at the end of the day, if you look at where a person can try to minimize some expenses this year, trying to just be as lean and mean on the input side, shopping around your chemicals, trying to minimize the amount of custom expenses you're paying for, minimize your debt service, taking some $130 shop rates and putting them back into your shop. It's just a lot of little things. I wish I had a magic bullet for you, but I don't. And so I just wanted to provide you with this little tool to use on your farm. And so we had another question. My big equipment is paid for. Is it advisable to borrow against my equipment to lock in some interest and provide working capital? That is a tough question, Clint. Frankly, my advice would be yes. Do you want to do stuff like this, when you have the flexibility, when you have your paid for equipment? If we make another leg lower in corn, soybean, or wheat prices, and you have a year-over-year loss, that isn't the best choice. The best choice is just to kind of hang it up. I'm a big believer that commodities are cyclical. When everybody's most bearish, that's when things tend to take a turn. If you know anything about me, I was posting funny pictures about how terrible the wheat is, and just very outlandish with my opinions of why are the ugly economics of wheat. And what do you know? Winter wheat rallied $1 a bushel last summer, and spring wheat rallied $3 a bushel. So at the end of the day, if we could predict the future, this would all be easier. But we just have to make the best decision we can today. And I think having working capital, minimizing your debt service is just a really strong, an important factor to running a lean and mean farm. So if anybody has questions here, that's kind of all. This is just a quick topic I thought up over the weekend. You probably have stuff to do and I have stuff to do. So if you have any questions, let's just answer some questions here and we will move on. Would this apply to land purchases made in the past 5 years? Jordan asks. I don't necessarily know exactly what you mean by that. If you could elaborate, I would appreciate it. Really, there is no way to necessarily fix. If an asset is paid, if you bought an asset above where the market value is at today, there's really no way to fix that. part of this analysis is just knowing, a prerequisite to what we're talking about here is just knowing our cash break evens, so we know if things are out of alignment. For example, using average yields, I've seen per unit, and once again, don't bucket me in with everybody here, but one farm in particular that I was working with, their cash break even for corn went from about $4.10 per bushel to $3.20 per bushel. And so, they're in the position where they've whittled that down. Their per acre cost of production hasn't necessarily lowered, but it's fair to assume that, we could probably pencil in another 5 or 10 bushels, maybe even more on their yields, another 10% on their yields to help lower that break even. So the prerequisite here is just knowing your cost of production, knowing if you have $50 an acre or more in equipment debt service, something probably needs to be readjusted here. I like to say $40, if you can be at $40 or under for annual debt service for equipment, and that it also include, I should say, annual equipment expense. So that's debt service and depreciation. And how I like to think about it is under $40 an acre, that if you were going to basically get your equipment in a rhythm where you're swapping out of one big piece of equipment every year, and you were just going to run your farm in perpetuity, could you do it on $40 an acre? So if you were, assuming you didn't have any debt, just making cash expenditures, paying your residuals and trading in, could you do $40 an acre? And so if you're at $40, $50, $60 an acre just in debt service, yeah, something probably needs to happen to kind of right the ship here. I think we had one more question here. If you sell assets, would you pay down debt or build working capital? That is a tough question. What I've told people, and this is where we start getting into the art and the science of managing the numbers. What I've told people in the past is if you're kind of running right up against one or two more sizable payments until you can just free yourself of the burden of that note. For instance, I had a guy who a farmer I know sold $100,000 of equipment, and he had a two $45,000 payments left. And for him, he just took that $100,000 and wiped out his notes. And yeah, his working capital position is still the same, but the interest was a little higher than what he would have liked. So it's an art and science, and I think your banker or your peer group would be a great sounding board here to help evaluate those situations. Last question: should paying partner owner salary for living expenses be considered a cost of production? Unless you have an off-farm job that you can push off your family living, I definitely think paying your owner draw, your family living, should definitely be included in your cost of production, because at the end of the day, a person can whittle that down, but health insurance is outrageously expensive. The cost of college tuition, just all that stuff is expensive. And at the end of the day, you need to have yourself insured. You need to put food on the table. You need to put shelter over your head. So I think you'd be harming yourself to excluding that from your cost of production. So anyway, I just wanted to provide you with this quick tool to use. And hopefully, I guess the challenge I wanted to leave you with today as we end this is come up with one idea for your farm in the next couple months that can lighten your cash debt service on it can even be your long-term notes. Use this tool to come up with one idea to bring to your banker to lower your cash expenditures for your debt service. And that just opens up a good, lively discussion, negotiation, and gets them understanding that you are a numbers-oriented farm. So I'm going to leave you with that today. I know you guys are busy. You have stuff to do. So I hope that was of some value to you, a quick ad hoc kind of ad lib webinar here. So all in all, have a great day and a great week, and hopefully that little tool is of some value to your farm. Thank you very much.